Hello, I'm Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video tutorial. When we think about landscape pictures, more often than not, we think about stunning locations like towering mountains, sweeping valleys, and winding streams. They may be enhanced in Photoshop, but they're very much representative of the real world. If you want to try something a bit unusual though, remember that landscapes don't have to be realistic. Using a little imagination and some quick tricks in Photoshop, they can become something altogether different. Our starting point, this shot of a windmill, is grounded in the real world, but by using the transform tool, we can make it much more exciting. Add some creative toning into the mix, work the contrast, and include some more foreground interest in the shape of these birds, and we get something that's much more interesting. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how it's all done using simple tools found in Photoshop and Elements like layers, blending modes, and the eraser tool. Okay, let's close down our finished image and open up the start image, which is called windmill.jpg. And the first thing we're going to look at is these fence posts, because although they work quite nicely as a lead-in line, drawing us into the focal point, which is the windmill, the farmers kind of put them in a bit too straight. They're not all that interesting. So we're going to distort them, making them look really nice and windswept. So first let's pick the polygonal lasso, which is hiding under the regular lasso tool here. I'm just holding down the left mouse button to select it from the menu. And then, taking a look in the options bar, we'll make sure that it's set to new selection, that the feathering is on 0, and that anti-alias is ticked. And then come down and we'll just click all around that closest fence post. Don't have to do it precisely at this stage. Back up to the top and the marching ants will appear all around it. And next up, we're going to hold down the Control key on the keyboard and press J. And what that does is it copies that selected area onto a new layer. And if I just drag my layers palette in from the side there, you can find yours by coming up to Window and down to Layers, you'll see that the fence post is now sitting on layer 1 above the background layer, which is the original image that we opened. And to make that fence post a bit more wonky, we can either press Ctrl and T on the keyboard, or we can come up to Edit and down to Free Transform. Give that a click and the bounding box appears all around those pixels that you copied to layer 1. Now we want the post to be leaning over a little bit, so position the cursor just outside one of these corner handles and then click and drag it to rotate. Something around about 10 degrees anti-clockwise should do the trick. But we're not done just yet, because I'm also going to hold down the Shift key and just drag out this corner handle so that we make it a little bit larger in the frame. Bringing it up to about 120%, you'll see that there in the options bar, should be just about fine. And I'm also just going to click inside the bounding box and drag it a little bit to the right. And that should be fine, so click the tick. Now of course, although we've got our fence post on an angle, it's not looking particularly good, because we've also rotated the background. But to take care of that, all we need to do is erase the parts we don't want. So I'll first just click on the zoom tool and zoom in on the top of that post there, and then come over and pick the eraser tool from the toolbox, and we're going to be wanting to use a large soft edge brush here, not quite that large. We'll bring the size down to about 300 pixels. Make sure the opacity is set at 100%, and then just making sure that you've got layer 1 still selected, click on the picture and we'll just erase that nasty hard edge. And just pressing and holding the spacebar to move around the image, just dragging it around and back up the other side. There we go. Now we haven't got very close to the post there, and to do this we're going to need to use a smaller brush. So either click back on the downward facing arrow, or for a shortcut, just use the left square bracket key on the keyboard. Keep tapping that until you get the brush down to around the size that you want. And as we get closer to that post, we'll also want to use a slightly harder edge. So just bring that hardness slider up to about 70%. Just keep clicking and erasing and doing the same on the other side until we get a nice, believable look. Now you may notice as you're erasing that you reveal parts of the post that's on the background layer. If you do that, just step backwards in your history palette, but don't worry too much if you reveal little pieces of it like we've got down here, because we'll be dealing with them a little bit later. First though, we're going to continue to distort the fence posts, so come back up and click back on the polygonal lasso again. Then make sure that you've got the background layer selected this time. Just give it a click in the layers palette, and we'll leave that central post alone, and this time we'll draw around the posts that are slightly further away from the camera. And just like before, press Ctrl and J on the keyboard to punch all those pixels into a new layer, and then Ctrl and T on the keyboard to bring up the free transform tool. Just clicking and dragging outside the corner handle to rotate. We're not going to push these ones too far, probably around 5 or 6 degrees clockwise this time, and we're not going to resize them either, so just click the tick, and then once again we'll zoom in onto the post that we've distorted so that we can take care of the background that's been transformed too. In this case, you'll see that we've lost a little bit of the side of the windmill there, but just like before, clicking on the eraser tool, bringing the brush size down, this time to about 80 pixels, we can just erase over that area, do the same on the background there, and that's looking pretty good really. Rotating these fence posts hasn't caused quite as much devastation as the main foreground one, so with just a few clicks of the eraser we can pretty much get away with it, and coming back out to a full view you'll see those posts have now got quite a nice sort of slant to them. Certainly much more interesting than what was there before. When you're happy with the transforming work that you've done, just come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. And this takes us back to one single background layer. But as I said earlier, the distorting work that we've done has thrown up a few irregularities. Particularly down here in the bottom left hand corner we can see just a little bit of the original post. And this little bit of barbed wire that's trailing off it. And scrolling around the parts of the image that have been transformed and distorted, you may also notice some repetition of pixels. Areas where the same bit of grass or stalk has been copied, pasted, and is now appearing twice, and this can really look quite irregular. So it's something that we'll have to take care of now. It's easily done though. Just click on the clone tool, set the brush size to about 150 pixels, make sure the mode is set to normal, opacity is 100%, and then we simply hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and we click on a clean area of the image and then just paint over the parts that we want to remove. There you see I've actually copied the same piece of grass over, so we'll have to deal with that. And a good way of doing it is actually by copying pixels from different parts of the image, and this kind of throws the viewer's eye off a little bit. If you have too much repetition going on in the same area, it's a bit of a dead giveaway. So we're just Alt clicking to sample an area and painting over anything that we want to remove. And it's worth taking a bit of time over this at this stage, because it's something that can really play on your mind afterwards. Once you've finished the image, saved it and flattened it and hung on the wall, anything like that is really going to stand out and bug you. So we'll just keep moving around and copying over any parts that we're not happy with until we've got something that doesn't offend the eye. And when you're working on images of this kind, you'll notice that some things are kind of easier to transform and hide than others. Grass in particular is a great one for digital photographers to have a go at, because it's such a kind of a random texture that you can pretty much clone out any distractions that you don't want. And a bit like sand and rock, the randomness of the texture makes that really easy. Okay, so we're done with our cloning work. Now it's time to add that toning effect. We're going to do it using an adjustment layer. So in the layers palette, just come down to this black and white circle here, the create new fill or adjustment layer icon, give that a click, and we're going to pick hue and saturation from the list. In the hue and saturation dialog box, make sure that colorize is ticked, and then we'll move the hue slider to 35, the saturation to 20, and the lightness we'll leave at 0. Click OK, and the toning effect is applied to the image. Now the reason I've added it as an adjustment layer is because we're going to be doing some contrast work on the background layer, and keeping it separate is going to stop any changes taking place to the tone. If we had just applied it straight to the background layer, as soon as we start making levels adjustments, we quite often get a shift in saturation, so we don't get one even tone across the whole image. But keep it on an adjustment layer and you'll be fine. And you may also be wondering just why we have, in fact, toned the image, because there's some quite nice colours going on there in the first place. Well, it's not just about mood, it's also a good trick when you're making composites, because applying a monotone effect helps hide any aberrations in colour, making any work that you do of this kind more seamless and believable. Next up, I'm going to be making those contrast adjustments that I just talked about, but first I'm just going to take a quick look at this right hand side of the picture here, because the way that the hedge seems to end so suddenly next to that gate is a little bit distracting, and I think that by cloning in a bit of extra hedge there, we can make it look much nicer. So we'll click on the background layer, come back up to the polygonal lasso, and I'm just going to borrow a bit of hedge here from the middle of the shot. Once the marching ants are up, just hit Ctrl and J again to copy that into a new layer. And of course here you'll see that because it's under the adjustment layer, it's still being governed by that same toning effect. And then we'll click on the Move tool and just bring that over to the other side of the picture. A little bit like I was saying with the cloning work, it helps when you're cutting and pasting stuff around a picture to use elements from different parts of it. If you use stuff that's too close, it always looks repetitious, it always looks fake. And here, just to further disguise the fact that we've copied this big bit of hedge, we're going to come up to Edit, down to Transform, and we're going to pick Flip Horizontal. And then, just as we did with the fence posts, I'm going to press Ctrl and T to bring up the Free Transform box. And I'm just going to drag that out to stretch it a little bit. That should be fine, I think. Just clicking inside the bounding box to move it around. And then click the tick. And to finish off, back to the eraser. We'll increase the size this time. And we'll also just make it a little bit softer again. So just hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and press the left square brackets keys. This, instead of changing the size, changes the softness of the edge of the brush. And then just take a look at that hard edge there in the sky. We're just going to click over that to take it away for good. Same with the bottom of the hedgerow that we've added. And that looks okay to me, so we'll come back out to a full view and then back up to Layer and down to Merge Down. And that's going to collapse Layer 1 into the background layer. Okay, so let's get on with making our contrast adjustments. And we're going to add these using adjustment layers as well. But first off, we're actually going to make a selection of the parts we want to change. So come back to the polygonal lasso again. And first up, we're just going to make a rough selection of the sky. We'll click around the top of the image and all the way back to the starting point. Then, to give us a good soft join between the areas we're changing and those we're leaving alone, come up to Select, down to Feather, and we're going to input a radius of 200 pixels. Click OK, and then with the selection still active, come down to the Create New Adjustment Layer icon again, give it a click and pick Levels. Now before we start moving the sliders around in the Levels palette, you'll have seen that by making a selection first, we've automatically added a mask to the adjustment layer. The areas in black are going to be left alone, those were outside of the selected pixels, and those in white we're going to be changing. And we've also got some grey in the middle there that's going to form the blend. So back over to the Levels palette, and we're going to click and drag the black point slider in, just to meet the end of the histogram there. And I'm also just going to drag that central slider over to the right a little bit as well. So that sky is looking nice and dark and brooding now. We can hit OK. And now we're going to do the same with the foreground. So click back on the background layer, and with the polygonal lasso still active, we're going to come down and make a selection of that. Just coming all the way around to take it all in. Back up to Select, and down to feather. We'll use the same pixel radius, which means that the effect we're applying is going to be blended 100 pixels this side and 100 pixels this side of the marching ants. Click OK, and then back down to the adjustment layer icon and pick levels again. This time we're going to drag that white point slider in, just brightening up all of that foreground. Bring the black point slider in a little bit as well, just ensuring we've got some nice deep shadows there. And I'm also going to push that gamma slider, the middle slider, over to the right a little, just so we get something that's nice and contrasty. Click OK, and already that's looking much nicer. We'll just untick the eye icon on those two adjustment layers, and you can see that the original, pretty flat and dull, but with the adjustments we've made, it's already loads more dramatic. And I'm just going to make one more selection, this time of all that grass in the bottom right corner, and I'll just hold down the Shift key and then get a little plus icon next to the polygonal lasso icon there, and that means we're going to add to the selection. Just going to continue that selection around the bottom left of the image too, back up to select and down to feather, 200 pixels again. I'm going to add another levels adjustment layer. This time I'm going to move that middle slider even further to the right, just darkening those areas a little more. And what that should give us is a little bit more emphasis on our lead-in line. If I just click that on and off, you'll see that our fence posts are standing out a little bit better. And of course we can continue to make selections and add levels adjustment layers all around the image, really exploiting that contrast until we get something that's really punchy and dramatic. But I'm pretty happy with the work that we've done there, so I'm going to leave it be. Right, so we've got a nicely transformed and distorted foreground and lead-in line. We've got a toning effect that's working really nicely, and we've made a huge improvement to the contrast. But in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to spice it up even further, adding some more foreground interest in the shape of some brooding crows, and we're also going to add a flock of birds to the sky, just to give it some nice texture up there. So make sure you join me then, and I'll show you how it's done.